My name is Cameron Benson. I'm the Creeks Division Manager for the City of Santa Barbara. I want to welcome all of you here this evening on behalf of the City of Santa Barbara and our co-host for tonight's event, Santa Barbara County Project Clean Water. I also want to thank and acknowledge all of our partners in putting this event together. We have Art from Scrap, the Ocean Future Society, Surfrider Foundation, Santa Barbara Channel Keeper, and Healing Oceans Together, which is a new organization that just, I understand, started up a couple of months ago here in Santa Barbara, and we're happy to have them tonight. Back in October 2007, we hosted Dr. Marcus Erickson to come to Santa Barbara and talk about marine debris experience, his experience with marine debris and the research that the Algalita Marine Research Foundation was doing on marine debris in the North Pacific Gyre and the initial findings from their research expeditions with regard to marine debris and specifically plastics in the Gyre. And now he and Anna Cummins, who were married just 2 days ago now? 3 days ago, congratulations, are here tonight to talk about the Algalita Foundation's newest research as they are moving down the west coast of North America on a 2,000-mile bicycle ride, the 2009 Junk Ride. And they're here tonight to present the most recent research from the Algalita Foundation's expeditions to the North Pacific Gyre. I'm going to do a brief introduction of both of them, and then I'll bring them up here to begin their presentation. Marcus Erickson received his PhD in science education from the University of Southern California before embarking on a 5-month, 2,000-mile journey down the Mississippi River on a raft made from plastic bottles. Last time he was here, he actually brought the raft, and we had it here for everyone to look at and sit on. This experience solidified his commitment to watershed conservation, leading him to the Algalita Marine Research Foundation in Long Beach. As the Director of Research and Education at Algalita, Dr. Erickson coordinates research projects and expeditions focusing on plastics in the marine environment. Anna Cummins received her master's degree in International Environmental Policy at the Monterey Institute for International Studies. She has worked in marine conservation, coastal watershed management, sustainability education, and high school ecology instruction. In 2004, while working with the Santa Cruz-based nonprofit Save Our Shores, Ms. Cummins joined Algalita's research voyage to Guadalupe Island to collect evidence of plastic ingestion by Laysan albatross. In 2007, she was appointed education advisor at Algalita, conducting school outreach and providing public presentations on the issue of plastic marine debris. Please join me in welcoming Marcus and Anna. Thank you.
Well, good evening. My name is Marcus Erickson. I work with the Algalita Foundation. Like you said, this is the middle of our Junk Ride tour, cycling 2,000 miles from Vancouver, Canada to Tijuana, Mexico, giving 40 presentations on this subject of plastic marine debris.
Good evening, everyone, and thanks for coming. It's really a pleasure to be here. We're actually at the tail end of this ride. We've been on the road for about 2 months now. Home is so close we can smell it. But as Marcus mentioned, we've been studying this issue of plastic building up in the Pacific Ocean for over 10 years. And what we saw on our last research trip a year ago, January, was so disturbing that we thought of this project to get people's attention. Phase 2 was building this crazy raft out of 15,000 plastic bottles, and Phase 3 is what we're on right now, bringing this research to the public, riding from Vancouver to Mexico, and giving away little samples of the Pacific soup that we collected in the Gyre to educators, legislators, and the media to show people what this problem really looks like, and to have some fun along the way.
So first, I'd like to tell you a bit about the history of plastics, then we'll go into some of the environmental and human health impacts, and then what we can actually do about it. I mean, we have this doom and gloom story about what's happening out to sea, but we want to make sure we leave you with realistic solutions on what we can do to curtail this plastic plague in the world's oceans. So the history of plastics, if you look on this graph, you can see billions of pounds on that axis over there, And on the horizontal axis, here's time. So look, prior to World War II, back in the 1930s, you wouldn't see much plastic in anyone's home. You wouldn't see plastic bottles and bags and cups and straws and things that we see commonplace around our neighborhoods today. What you might see is maybe a pair of pantyhose, and that's it as far as synthetics in someone's home. But during the war effort, get all this new research and industry built around the war effort and new kinds of synthetic fuels and lubricants and materials like plastic. So post-World War II, this industry was already up and running. So very quickly they switched from the wartime effort to your domestic homes to transform our daily lives into this plastic sort of throwaway society. Now, you can see between 1936 and 1990s, it took us 60 years to build up to 60 billion pounds of plastic being produced in this country each year. Another 20 years to double that. So we see in recent years this skyrocketing in production. And that rapid increase, it sort of parallels the rapid accumulation of plastic trash in the mid-Pacific, which we'll talk about in a moment. Next slide. So in a throwaway society, and here's a picture that epitomizes that throwaway culture. This is Life magazine, 1955. It even reads in this article, it says that the throwaway culture relieves the housewife of the burden of ever having to wash a dish again. So in the throwaway society, I mean, where is a way? We usually talk as educators to roughly 50 to 60 schools each year. And we always ask kids, you know, have you heard this phrase, throw it away? And the kid's like, yeah, well, then where's away? And the kid's, I don't know. It goes somewhere. Well, the California Integrated Waste Management Board went to figure out where away really is. They figured half of that 120 billion pounds of plastics that we produce in this country each year, half is destined for a landfill, that eternal tomb where we bury things. 20% becomes durable goods, things that last for a while, things like cell phones and luggage and car bumpers, things that will exist for a long time, which may end up in a landfill anyway once they're used up. Call them durable goods for now. Only 5% is recycled, and we shouldn't really call it recycling. The word should be recovery. So the 120 billion pounds, 5% is recovered. Those recycling centers, they don't recycle anything. They're redistributors of trash. So they send stuff to third parties that then either recycle it, export it, or landfill it. That still leaves 25% of the plastic we make that's unaccounted for. Here is a way. And as you know, having walked the beaches here or any beach in the world, you're beginning to see more and more plastic waste washing up on shore. Now, this is Camilo Beach in Hawaii. So just before we hopped on our research vessel for our expedition last year, we left from Hilo, Hawaii. Before hopping on the boat, we went down to this beach at 60 miles south of Hilo on the Big Island. There's interesting geography of the Big Island. It has a very straight beach for 60 miles, then a hook. Now, the currents are pushing against the island and pushing debris down into that hook. That's Camilo Beach. And for who knows how many thousands of years, the local residents would go there to find wood, to find logs to use in their societies. Now you go there, it's all plastic. In fact, today when you talk about marine debris, 100 years ago it might have been coconuts and seeds and logs and pumice stones. Today, it's plastic. When you hear about marine debris, it's synonymous with plastic waste. In fact, here at this beach in the high tide line, you go and sweep the sediment, you get a handful of plastic fragments. This is why you really can't tell where the plastic trash is coming from that's out there. It's broken down these small, small particles. Now, we talk about the impact of this stuff. Remember, it's made from petroleum. It's designed to last forever. Some plastics are extremely UV resistant, like airplane windows, acrylics. UV resistant, they're designed to last forever, and that's just what they do. So here's a picture of a snapping turtle. It's not difficult to find photographs, images, and documentation of animals being impacted by our plastic waste, either ingesting it or becoming entangled by it. So we had the chance to see this turtle a few months ago. If you keep the cursor right there, yeah, just press. Yeah.
This is a common snapper turtle female, found about 10 or 11 years ago in this part of town, in Kenner, north of New Orleans. And she was found by a 10-year-old boy in a drainage canal. And very unusually, she had a milk jug ring trapped around her waist. Apparently, as a baby, as a hatchling, she'd gotten stuck on this milk jug ring and had to grow around it. It's most amazing that she was able to and survive. In fact, she even was gravid. She had eggs inside of her when we found her.
So she's since been named Mae West.
Because of thin waist. But the backbone, unfortunately, the backbone has never grown normally, and the turtle even flexes. If it were to go out in the wild now, it may break its back walking around the swamp.
So that's an example of the throwaway design of plastics. One solution that we contend is that throwaway design has to end. It's a material that we're finding has enormous environmental impacts and potential human health impacts. It's the wrong material for throwaway products. For things like paper, metal, and glass, which are either they'll biodegrade if they're lost, they'll oxidize if they're lost, or they're inert if they're lost. Plastic, none of the above. Now, the plastics industry doesn't want to get rid of throwaway plastic products, like plastic bags and bottles and cup lids and straws and forks and knives. These things, I mean, you saw that skyrocketing curve of production. It's very profitable. So because we advocate eliminating the throwaway design, we often have plastics industry advocates in our audience, and they'll say things like, you're not going to see a plastic bottle in the environment. You're not going to see a plastic bag or a styrofoam cup. It's easy to find those images. Next slide. So I went to YouTube, and I put in there plastic, fish, ingestion, and all these videos pop up. This one fish had swallowed a whole plastic bottle. Plastic bag, same thing. You can easily find, here's a turtle excreting a plastic bag. And there are dozens of photographs like this. Next slide. Here's a turtle caught in a lawn chair. Just to show that, remember, this stuff is made from petroleum, designed to last forever, and it does just that. Now, part of my introduction to this issue, I had a chance about 10 years ago as a high school science teacher way back then to join 14 students. We went to Hawaii and Midway Atoll. I mean, it was the best gig I was ever offered. Do you, Marcus, want to go join these kids for 2 weeks, paid vacation, Hawaii and Midway? Sure, why not? So went there, went to Hawaii, went to Midway, and at Midway Island, it's a beautiful island. It's as big as your typical high school campus. It's tiny. And there are thousands of birds there. It's now a national wildlife refuge. And there are these birds called the Laysan albatross. They're like a giant goose, basically, in proportion and size. And we're watching them feed their chicks. And what the adults do, they'll fly to, they have a huge feeding range north of the Hawaiian Islands. And they'll pick up lots of squid and fish eggs. They'll fly back to Midway and feed their chicks. Now, while we're watching them do this, we're also picking up lots of trash on the island. Things like cigarette lighters. Here's a shotgun shell, a little fishing float, a toothbrush, and an action figure leg. And here's some natural debris, a big pumice stone. So we're finding, tons of stuff, thousands and thousands of bottle caps, and things we recognize from our communities here on the mainland, we're somehow ending up on this island 3,000 miles away. In fact, everything you see here didn't wash up on shore. I pulled this out of the carcass of a single albatross. We saw hundreds of skeletons, and every one had plastics in his chest. Bottle caps, for example, here, pouring out of his chest cavity. Now, it's not just one bird or one turtle or one fish as the ambassador for the issue. If we look at all the evidence of either ingestion or entanglement, it adds up to a lot of marine organisms. 44% of the world's seabirds, almost half the world's seabirds, either ingesting or entangled by plastics. These are documented cases. 22 different kinds of cetaceans, that's whales and their kin. All marine sea turtles, and a very long list of fish. In fact, our foundation found 7 new fish species that were ingesting plastics.
So this was also my introduction to the issue. Back in 2002, I was working for a local organization up in Santa Cruz, working on marine conservation, and I heard Captain Moore give a presentation about plastics accumulating in the ocean. I was stunned that I'd never heard about this issue, being a lifelong environmentalist coming from a green background, but I knew nothing about this issue. So I volunteered in 2004 to join him on a research trip down to Guadalupe Island, 150 miles off the coast, nobody there, strong population of laysan albatross, and every single bolus that we collected. The bolus is what they regurgitate, the things they can't digest. Every single one of them had plastic fragments. And the stats were pretty staggering on some of them. They were anywhere from 30 to 80% plastic instead of their natural food that they should be eating. So this, to me, was the clincher and really inspired my involvement in it. So where's all this plastic coming from? When we talk to people about this issue, their first assumption is it must be coming from the boating industry, from the naval industry, from fishing fleets dumping their trash overboard. The truth is that most of it comes right here from you and I on land. There have been some studies done by the United Nations on percentages of where this plastic debris comes from. They're anywhere from 80 to 20 land-based versus maritime industry. Or if you go to places like Hawaii, it might be a higher percentage, say 50-50 land-based versus maritime-related. But the point is that most of it comes right here from us on land. Next slide. And you can see exactly how it happens. Now, Marcus and I have been on the road now for 2 months, biking through some of the most beautiful areas I've ever seen, backcountry roads from Vancouver all the way down here to Santa Barbara, but nowhere have we not seen an endless trail of plastic packaging and cups and utensils the whole way. So this is where it starts. You see this litter building up in the streets. Some of it may be accidental, some of it may be intentional. It's the overcrowded garbage cans falling over, or it's plastic bags blowing out of dump trucks. They wind their way down to our rivers and streams through the rain and out to sea. Next slide. Once they get into the ocean, they can get caught in these massive oceanic current systems. And we've been focused on the North Pacific Gyre. You may have heard of the garbage patch or the island of garbage twice the size of Texas. So we'll bust that myth in a moment. But this is how it starts. This is a study done by some scientists tracking the movements of the North Pacific Ocean. You can see to the right those blue squares, that's the West Coast, and the red circles are Japan. So imagine each of those little buoys as a piece of debris. You can see in 6 months, one bottle cap flowing off the coast of California has gone halfway to Hawaii. In a year, it's gone all the way to Hawaii, and will keep going all the way towards Japan. In 3 years, a single bottle cap from our coast riding the currents can float gently all the way to Japan. And you can see a similar pattern in Japan, those buoys coming straight towards us. In 10 years, a piece of debris can make the entire loop around the North Pacific Ocean. So we think of this as the world's largest toilet bowl that never flushes. It just circulates our junk around and around and around. Some of it may be ingested by animals, and some of it just remains breaking down into smaller and smaller pieces until it starts to resemble food for many creatures. Next slide. So this is what we call the North Pacific Gyre. Now that myth of the Texas-sized garbage patch started from when our founder, Captain Charles Moore, noticed this issue, started going out and documenting it. His first sampling area was roughly the size of Texas. That was what we call in the eastern garbage patch. But what we're now finding is this plastic debris is dispersed throughout the entire North Pacific Gyre, which is roughly twice the size of the United States. And it's not an island at all. It's not a tangible mass that you might be able to walk on or build a house on. It's more like a thin plastic soup extending all the way across the North Pacific Ocean. Now, this is just one of 5 gyres in the world. There's a North and a South Pacific, a North and South Atlantic, and in the Indian Ocean. So as you can see, we've literally just scratched the surface of this problem. All of our data to date has really come from the North Pacific Gyre. But now that the issue is starting to get more attention, more voyages are going to be going out and collecting more data. We're hoping to do both the North and South Atlantic gyre next year. And what we want to show is that this is a really global, it's a global issue, and we need global action and responsibility to deal with it. Next slide. So our founder, Captain Moore, came across this issue somewhat by accident back in 1997. Sailing from Hawaii back to Los Angeles, he came across this accumulation of debris in the gyre. He had taken a detour, through the doldrums, this area that has a lack of wind. And that's when he came across this nasty surprise, a trail, an endless trail of toothbrushes and bottle caps and lighters as far as he could see. So that was the inspiration to start this project, to go out to the gyre, to collect samples from the surface of the ocean and start documenting trends over time. Next slide. So what we've been doing, we drag a Manta Trawl. It's like a plankton net behind our boat. We'll drag this for up to 10 miles, and we gather our data, our samples, at the end of a long mesh tube. Next slide. And what you can see is one of our samples here from 1999. We found that if you picked every single piece of plastic out and separated it out from the zooplankton, the naturally occurring organisms out there, dried it out and weighed it, that in 1999 the plastic outweighed zooplankton by a factor of 6 to 1. This was 1999. We've since gone to the gyre 6 times, and we're now focused more on surface abundance or density. Looking at plastic to plankton is a good way to describe it. It gives people a visual image, but it's actually much more accurate quantitatively to look at density. So back in 1999, this was 0.002 grams per meter squared, which is roughly like half a rice grain size of plastic per meter squared of ocean. Now, if you look at the entire size of the North Pacific Ocean, roughly 5 million square miles, you start to see how what is a thinly dispersed plastic soup really adds to a tremendous amount of waste. So I'm now going to pass around a sample that we collected a year ago January on our 6th expedition. Next slide. Our 2008 expedition, in which we went back to some of those same areas that Captain Moore first sampled in 1999. As I pass this around, keep in mind that it's a concentrated sample. So what you'll see in this jar, this plastic soup, represents roughly 3 football fields of area condensed into one jar. So if you keep in mind this concentration, it also gives you an idea of why cleanup is so difficult. That handful of plastic you'll see in that jar would be sprinkled out over an area 3 football fields in size. Next slide. So I mentioned that most of the debris that we find is land-based. We also do find fishing-related debris out in the gyre, like these, what we call ghost nets. When fishermen discard their nets at sea, or if nobody picks them up, these are now made out of synthetics, made out of plastic, so they continue fishing as they travel around these oceanic currents. They can find each other and knit into these massive behemoths, next slide, like this one. This was one we saw that was too large to even recover, so we tagged them with a satellite device so that a boat can go pick them up later. These can continue fishing as they circulate the currents. As you see here, a small fish, but they can trap much larger creatures, like sea turtles and sharks. Next slide. So in 2008, when we went back for our 6th expedition, we found that the density of plastic floating on the surface of the ocean had doubled in just 10 years. We found in 1999 0.002 grams, and now you can see it was 0.004 grams per meter squared. So this was extremely shocking to us that in such a short period of time, considering how long plastics have been around, that we've had this rapid accumulation of debris thousands of miles from land. Next slide. We're also now beginning to look at plastics integrating into the food chain. So in our previous voyages, we'd done most of our trawling during the day. But on this voyage, we did more trawling day and night. And we found something very interesting in our nighttime trawls. You can see a close-up here of one of our samples that we pulled up at night. What you see in here, these eyes looking out at you, those are lanternfish. These are fish that live in the deeper mesopelagic zone that only surface at night to feed on zooplankton. Next slide. So in our nighttime trawls, we collected 671 lanternfish. These are critical fish in the marine ecosystem. These are not fish that you and I eat, but they're a primary food source for some of the larger species like tuna and squid, sharks, sea lions. Well, we don't eat sea lions, but but they're a critical part of the ocean's biomass. They make up roughly 60% of the ocean's fish biomass. Next slide. So these were all 6 species that we collected, 4 species of lanternfish and 2 others. We removed the stomachs of all 671 fish. Their stomachs are roughly 1/7 their full body size. And here is what we found inside. So there's the stomach that we removed. And here's what we found inside. You can see the plastic fragments, how closely they resemble the food that they should be eating, both in size and in shape and color. Next slide. Here were the stomach contents of another lanternfish. To the right, plastic fragments, and to the left, zooplankton. Next. And here was the record holder, one 2.5-inch long lanternfish with 84 fragments of plastic inside its stomach. So this was just the beginning of our explorations into plastics integrating into the food chain that we depend on. We found of all 671 fish, 35% had plastics in their stomachs. So this leads to further questions about how this plastic is affecting their ability to digest food, if these plastic particles are staying in their system or are they passing them, and what sorts of impacts is this having on their ability to both surface and then retreat back to the depths where they live. So we found that in a very short period of time, our plastic waste is entering the food chain that we depend on.
So then we thought, what do we do about it? As educators, we have different programs we put together. One we called Message in a Bottle, with 3 phases. Because we saw that the amount of trash out there, the abundance had doubled in 10 years, and now we're finding inside fish that feed the fish that you and I eat, we thought we must do something now to get global awareness. So a 3-phase project. Phase 1 was to go and get samples of the North Pacific gyre, get 100 jars of that plastic plankton soup. Phase 2 was to do this stunt to get the nation, the world's attention, build a raft out of junk, out of plastic bottles, and sail across the ocean like Kon-Tiki style and just see where we land. Then phase 3 is what we're doing right now. We'll have this cycling speaking tour, 2,000 miles, giving 40 presentations and giving away those little jars of plastic soup. So I want to tell you a bit more about phase 2, this rafting voyage, because it was a bigger adventure than we bargained for. Now, we thought it'd be like a simple little boating trip. You know how sailboats usually take about 3 weeks to get from here to Hawaii? Typical Transpac is 3 weeks. So we thought, okay, we'll give ourselves 6 weeks. 12 weeks later, we're still bobbing up the coast of Waikiki in this thing that we called junk. So we took 15,000 plastic bottles, and next slide, please. We stuffed them inside of these socks made from derelict fishing gear. We made these 30-foot long, 2-foot diameter socks, basically, triple wrapped, full of bottles, put those under a deck made from 30 old sailboat masts. Went to every junkyard down the coast and found these masts, tied them all together, and now to be high and dry, we figured what kind of a cabin is lightweight, built for wind, and water resistant? Next slide. An airplane, a Cessna 310 aircraft. So we tied this whole thing together, 10,000 knots, and called this thing junk. And that's departure day, June 1st, 2008. Now, what we did, we shot a bunch of videos and took photographs and kept journals along the way and sent those to Anna. There are 3 of us involved in this, myself, another sailor, Joel, and Anna. And the 3 of us worked together on our most recent gyre voyage, doing the research, and the 3 of us began this project, junk. So Joel and I, we got to sail this thing. Anna was the land-based support. She ran the blog. She kept on fundraising and was telling us where the hurricanes were. We had 3 hurricanes come within 300 miles of us. Now, our worst storm was actually on day 3. So on day 1, we were towed out to sea and put on anchor at San Nicolas Island, where we sat for a while with these really nasty storms. One had 50-knot winds, waves going over the raft. One wave pushed that airplane across the deck a foot in the middle of the night. So we got up, and antennas were bent over. We had a bunch of the bottles, 2,000 bottles at least, where the caps got loose a little bit and water rushed in. So that morning, the boat sank a foot deeper in the water, and we had all these milk crates tied to the top of the raft, where all our canned goods were. They were now underwater. It's like all our labels washed off the cans. So we played Mystery Meal the next 2 months. So we made like 35 little YouTube videos, 30 seconds each, and I could send those to Anna, real low resolution, and Anna built this fabulous website, junkraft.com, where you can see these videos. But I've got 4 I want to show you right now, which talk about that whole delabeled can issue and about the plastics. the ocean stripped all the labels off our cans. They got rusted. Now we got to eat them. It's all beans and corn and peas.
Okay, come on, corn. Give me 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 corn. Corn. Beans.
One more? Hey, let's see what it is.
You have the best. Let's go for the best before. More beans.
So, no wind. We're completely becalmed today. There's no wind whatsoever. So we're just going to fish and eat. Hey, fishy, 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 fishy. Oh, there he is. Right there. Arrgh.
Lunch.
We are now skirting the edge of the North Pacific Gyre, roughly 1,000 miles east of Hawaii. And we're finding lots of plastic on the surface of the ocean.
It's mostly small fragments, blue, green, white, and black, among many different kinds of zooplankton. Everywhere you go in the North Pacific Ocean, we find plastic.
So I filleted this fish, thinking we're going to eat it, and here's what I found. It's full of plastic. This is the whole reason that we're out here, to bring this to your attention. The plastic isn't benign. The fish won't pass it. The plastic is full of persistent organic pollutants, things like PCBs, DDT, PAHs, things that are known human carcinogens and endocrine disruptors, things you don't want in your body, but they're in the fish that we eat.
I don't want plastic in my sushi.
So that was our little adventure at sea, and it worked. We had about 250,000 people following our website, and about 30,000 within the hour of our arrival. And about 3 weeks after that, I got to be on the Martha Stewart show with 6 minutes of national airtime to talk about junk. But I want to return to one photograph. It's of that fish, the rainbow runner. Now, this is a species that you'll see in fish markets or menus in restaurants in Hawaii. It's one that we directly harvest from the sea to eat. And I watched this thing grow under our raft. I mean, I watched it hatch as a little tiny fry with its yolk sac still attached. And I watched a couple dozen of them keeping up with our raft the whole time, like traveling up to 3 knots. I mean, we were cruising. And I watched them get bigger and bigger. As we got hungrier, they looked more tasty, and we fished them out of the ocean. And I filleted this one, put the fillets in a pan, planning to eat it, opened the gut, and saw it was full of plastic. Now, these plastics have this amazing ability to soak up all kinds of persistent organic pollutants, things like pesticides, PCBs, PAHs, and these are things like smog that reigns on the ocean surface, like oil drops from cars that wash down our streets and drains out to sea. So all these things, they don't mix with water, but they stick to petroleum substances like plastic. So over time, a little plastic pellet becomes this toxic little pill. We call them POPs, persistent organic pollutants. So here's your POPs quiz. Can one plastic pellet have 100, 1,000, or 1,000,000 times more pollutants than ambient seawater? What's your guess? 1,000,000. They really become these toxic little pills. Now, the nature of a fish, its anatomy, it's got a big mouth and a little butt. So the plastic goes in and it gets stuck. It doesn't break down. It actually, the bottleneck is at the small intestines. So it has this long residence time inside the fish's stomach. What we're finding out now, what the research is right now, is to figure out once plastic enters a fish and sits there in its gut for a long time, waiting for the fish to physically get bigger and grow to then excrete it, do those plastics desorb those POPs into their tissues and organs? That's where the research is right now. Now, last year we found fish for the first time full of plastics. Now we're going to get those fish and try and correlate the ones that had plastics in their guts, compare those to ones that don't, and see if there's a difference in POPs in their tissues and organs. That's what the science is right now.
So the impacts of this plastic debris on marine wildlife have been well documented by many groups. I'm sure that's not news to anyone in this room. We've been documenting the synthetic sea for over 10 years, but what we're starting to look at now is how synthetic are we as a result of these plastics in the marine environment, getting into the food chain, loaded with POPs, and now possibly winding up on our dinner plate. I'm sure everyone in this room has a natural affinity for sea life, for the turtles and the sea lions that we've been discussing, but we think what might impact some people that don't have that same affinity to these creatures at sea is, how is it affecting me? Next slide. So we're looking at what we call our body burden, a lifetime of exposure to synthetic chemicals, both in the food that we're eating, in the water in those plastic bottles that we're drinking out of, in the food that comes wrapped in plastic, also in our cosmetics, our shampoos, this whole lifetime of synthetics that in a very short period of time since the Industrial Revolution we've flooded our society with. There's been a study, we're actually looking at my body burden. This has been done by other groups, and it has a personal meaning and personal significance for Marcus and I. We were reunited through this plastics issue. We met at Captain Moore's birthday party. We got engaged in the middle of that plastic soup a year ago, January, and as you heard just a couple days ago, on our ride, we got married. So we're starting to think about what is the toxic legacy we're leaving to the next generation. For women, one of the ways that we pass these chemicals on is through childbirth and breastfeeding. Next slide. This was a study done by the Environmental Working Group called 10 Americans, where they looked at the blood of newborns in their umbilical cord and found that these newborns had 287 industrial chemicals in their blood, chemicals that are linked to brain defects, to reproductive disorders, to infertility, to a host of other impacts. And the suite of these chemicals, the mixture of these chemicals in the blood of every one of us has not yet been looked at. What are the effects of all these chemicals combining with one another? It's a new experiment, and the impacts are largely unknown. Next slide. So we're actually looking at my physical body burden. When we were up in Portland, we took my blood to have sampled for PCBs, DDT, flame retardants, and other chemicals that are known to stick to plastic in the marine environment that are being ingested by the fish that you and I eat, and quite possibly winding up on our dinner plate.
Let the vein fill back up. I think we're...
There should definitely be plenty, and that was about 60 cc's. Okay, that's a lot. So we just took about 60 cc's of my blood. We're now going to have it centrifuged to be sampled for PCBs, DDTs, and other chemicals.
So we've now given this doom and gloom situation of plastic waste impacting the world's oceans. Our planet is 2/3 ocean, and we're finding waste everywhere. We've also talked about this life cycle of plastics. We make this stuff by the billions of pounds. There's a huge life cycle. There's a small window of value that we still enjoy. Some people like to go get their water bottle. They drink this ice-cold water, and then the bottle they discard, and they don't have to carry a canteen all day long. Or for bags. They like going to the store to get the bags, all their grocery in bags, and then discard the bags or create this pillow under their sink of bags because people don't like to have to carry their cloth bags in with them. Remember their cloth bags. Wash their cloth bags every couple months. That's a short window of convenience of these throwaways that we enjoy. There's a huge life cycle. So we've talked about the post-consumer impact of waste, of urban blight, of trash at sea, environmental impacts, and now we're seeing potential human health impacts to the food that we ingest. We haven't talked at all about some of the health impacts of plastics that are wrapping what we eat and what we drink. There's also a pre-consumer impact of cost that we haven't talked about. Which I know very well. I'm a Gulf War veteran. So 18 years ago, I sat outside Kuwait City, drenched with oil drops. I remember my whole platoon of Marines, we sort of knew why we were there. Now, petroleum is the raw material for plastic. That graph I showed earlier, that first graph, you saw a big dip around the early 1970s. That was because of the OPEC embargo. So there's this huge cost we pay for plastic, from the pre-consumer cost of getting access to raw material to the post-consumer impact on the environment and human health. What we contend is that small window of convenience for this throwaway culture, it's not worth it. Next slide. So what do we do about it? What can we do today? Practically, can we do in our society, in our communities, individually, to make a huge difference? We often get the statement, well, just go get it. Go scoop it up. Get a big ship. Well, one person actually said, get a fleet of helicopters, drag a bunch of nets, scoop it up, and drop it in a volcano. End of story. We're like, well, it's not quite that easy. As Anna described, that little maple syrup jar with a handful of plastic, that's 3 football fields that we sieved. And you can't keep the living organisms out as you're skimming it. You're getting all the zooplankton with it. Now, we have 5 million square miles of ocean surface in just the North Pacific alone. The planet's 2/3 ocean. The prospect of sieving all that to get the trash out is unrealistic. My opinion is what's there is there to stay. What's amazing is that when we categorize all the plastic in that sample by size, the smallest stuff, 0.5 millimeter or smaller, begins to disappear. Now, what we have yet to figure out is where is it going. What I think is happening is it's being sequestered in sediment. It's either you have these silica skeleton organisms that stick to it, like bryozoans, and make it the small particles heavy and sink, or it's being sequestered in fish feces, and then it's just sinking to the bottom. So we're going to have this layer of sediment called the plasticine, which is there forever. What we can do, though, is stop adding more. Now, there's one common post-consumer fix that the plastics industry advocates, and that is recycling. That all we need to fix this problem is more recycle bins. Next slide. So is recycling the answer? This is taken from Puente Hills landfill. It's the biggest landfill in the United States. They get 1,300 tons of trash a day. And I stood there on top of this mountain watching all these trucks come in. And on this site, there's one building called a MRF, Materials Recovery Facility. It's a huge, huge building, and they have a giant conveyor belt, and that's where all your recycling bin stuff goes. That's where all the dry business waste goes. And people physically watch all this stuff go by in a conveyor belt, and one person's job is just to pull off milk jugs. That's all they do, milk jugs all day long. One person pulls off water bottles. One person pulls off peat bottles, the soda bottles. One person pulls off aluminum cans, or paper gets taken away in other pile over here. And all this stuff, it gets baled in giant bales as big as like cars. And I'm walking through this canyon of trash. And I'm asking the guy, where's the stuff go? And he says, all that plastic is going to China. All the plastic bags you think you're recycling, it's going to China. The problem is, post-consumer plastics, when they're wet and dirty, nobody wants to clean them. Because you can't melt away, you can't burn away you can't burn away all the food waste, the labels or inks, like you can with glass and metal. You can melt them at high temperatures and burn away all that stuff. Whereas for plastics, they have a very low melting point. If you try and burn pizza grease off a styrofoam plate, you're going to burn the plate. So to truly recycle these plastics, you have to wash them. And nobody wants to do that. They're inefficiently recovered. We just got back. We actually visited 2 recycling centers in the last few months, one just 2 weeks ago. Burbank Recycling Center does the same thing, gets all these bales. We said, where's the stuff go? He said, China. What happens then? I don't know. But all the wet trash, he has to landfill. Nobody wants it. He can't even export it to China. They don't want it. We just got back from the Marin County Recycling Center and asked this fellow, Joe Garbarino, who's been dealing with trash for 48 years in Marin. And he said, same thing. He bales his stuff. China will take it. They don't want the wet and dirty stuff. That all gets landfilled. So the truth is, your plastic trash, what you think you're recycling, either gets downcycled, which means made into lower quality products, like lumber, carpeting, fleece clothing, and those things are typically not recovered and reused again. Or it gets exported overseas. We're not sure what happens then. In fact, all 3 entities that we visited Puente Hills landfill, Burbank Recycling Center, Marin County Recycling Center, they all said China. They all said, we don't know what happens then. Or it gets landfilled. It's buried forever.
Yeah, we're not trying to diss recycling in general. It works well for glass and aluminum. But we also know that recycling is the preferred party line coming from the industry, that's the solution to this plastics issue is we just need more recycling bins, when the truth is we can't recycle our way out of this situation. We need, first of all, to come up with a smarter design. We're taking this insanely valuable material, this resource, petroleum, turning it into products that are designed to last forever, but we're making products that we then turn around and throw away. Next slide. So it's just not a smart use of resources. We need to come up with, instead, a truly cradle-to-cradle approach. The approach that we've had thus far is cradle to grave. We make these products, whether they're a pen or a lighter or a toothbrush, that when we're done with these products, the grave is the landfill or, unfortunately, the ocean. They have no further use to us. We need to come up with a smarter design where the end of life cycle of that product, it then becomes the raw material for a new product. If you've had a chance to ever see the book Cradle to Cradle, it's actually made with that same principle in mind so that you could theoretically take apart the book, which is made out of inorganic resins and plastic fillers, and you could then turn it into a new product. So it's a closed loop. We humans are the only ones that really have waste. It's a completely human construct. But if you look to nature, there is no waste. Anytime there's a so-called waste, it becomes food for a new product or for a new organism. We've seen transitional steps. We've seen some redesign of plastics, bioplastics. I'm sure you've all seen these plastics made from corn or from potatoes or soy. We have a couple of pros and cons with bioplastics. They are plant-based, so with the right composting environment, they can be recycled or composted, but they require a high-heat commercial composting facility. So I've often seen bioplastics at green events where they just go straight to the trash, and that's definitely defeating the purpose. But it does show people that there are different ways to do things, that if we put our mind to it, we can come up with a smarter design. Bioplastics, unfortunately, don't break down in the ocean. And we had a chance to test this out with the junk raft. We had a mesh bag full of corn cups and potato forks and what have you. 88 days being dragged behind the raft, zero change. I've also tried this with my home composter and a bunch of potato forks when I was teaching a cooking class. After 3 months, we had beautiful compost full of forks. So there may be some applications for bioplastics, but ultimately they don't get at the root of the problem, which is this disposable mentality that we have, that we can use things once and throw them away. We can do better than that. Next slide. We're also, we've seen some structural controls, some ways to keep this waste out of the ocean. Beach cleanups, which are a great way to get people out on the beach, seeing what's out there, often gathering valuable data on what are the most common items. Ah, okay, there you go. Surfrider, Father's Day, you can get out and join a local beach cleanup. We've been partners with Surfrider on this ride, and we're huge fans of what they're doing with their Rise Above Plastics campaign. So what better way to spend Father's Day than picking up trash and keeping this world safer for the next generation. Structural controls are also a way that we keep plastic out of the ocean. These are the net booms or the catch basin inserts, the filters that we put on storm drains. Unfortunately, it's a lot more expensive to clean up a mess than it is to prevent one in the first place. We've seen where we live in Los Angeles, after rain, going down to the Ballona Creek, which is what you see here. This is the first day after rain. We saw tons of waste just flowing through little holes in the nets. We literally saw workers scooping out truckloads full of this debris. They get overloaded in a storm situation. So this is not to say that we shouldn't have these controls, simply to say that we need to go beyond and stop this problem at the source. Next slide. We're going to continue as a foundation our research. There are 5 gyres in the world, and so far we only really have good data from the North Pacific. So next year we'll go to the North Atlantic for the first time, hopefully to the South Atlantic, if we can raise the funds. So anyone who wants to get involved, we could definitely use your support. And we're going to finish or continue our research into the toxicity of fish to find out these lanternfish that we now know are ingesting plastics. Are they also ingesting those chemicals that are sticking to the plastic? Are those chemicals desorbing into their tissues through the digestion process and then bioaccumulating as they go up the food chain to some of the larger creatures like tuna that you and I eat? Next slide. We can continue education, which is what we're doing here on our junk ride. We've had a chance to give about 35 talks down the coast of California, and also to give away small jars full of that plastic soup. We've had a chance to give one to the mayor of San Francisco about 2 weeks ago, Gavin Newsom, who is also running for governor, so we would love to have him on our side. Also the mayor of Portland, Edmonds, Santa Cruz, and San Jose. So we're really hoping that we can remove this issue from this out of sight, out of mind quality that it's had and show people this is what's happening to our Pacific Ocean. Next slide. We also think legislation is a key way to address this issue. We've seen this legislation work around the world. China's banned plastic bags. The list of countries around the world that have enacted legislation to either put fees on plastic bags or ban them outright, from South Africa to Australia to Zanzibar, Bhutan, Somalia, the list goes on, and it's growing every day. So we had a chance about 3-4 weeks ago to bring our junk raft to Sacramento, and you can see it there on the front steps of the Capitol. It was a great display visual to talk to legislators about some of the bans and fees that are being introduced. Next slide. We also, up in Sacramento, with our raft on that front lawn, had a chance to interact with the American Chemistry Council a bit. So we saw them do a few laps around the raft, looking very suspicious, and then kind of conference under some shadows. The next day we had a press conference, our own press conference. We had a bunch of media there. The American Chemistry Council had a couple representatives, and as soon as there was a break in the action, they pulled the reporters aside and had their own press conference at our event, which we thought was a little sneaky. But what we heard them say over and over and over is the solution to this problem is more recycling, more recycling, more recycling. That the burden is not on the polluters, that it's on you and I. They say it's not plastic that's the problem, it's people that's the problem, littering. We would like to see more cooperation from the industry. I'll show you an example of the kinds of tactics they resort to make sure this legislation doesn't pass. Here, this next slide was a study done on bisphenol A. You've probably heard about BPA. It's recently been banned in Canada. It's now, you'll find a host of new products that are BPA-free because it's been found to have very reproductive disorders, found to be an endocrine disruptor, and BPA was originally designed to be a synthetic estrogen. It was then later found to make a better plastic. So this was a study looking at a host of studies conducted both by government and by the chemical corporations about harm from exposure to BPA. And you can see from the 149 studies done by government, 93% showed harm from exposure to BPA. The chemical corporations did 12 of their own studies and found 0% harm from exposure to BPA. So this is a very clear example of bias. You have to follow the funding to find out sometimes what the results will be. When we present our data to legislators, the American Chemistry Council will often be there with their own funded research that counteracts what we're trying to convey. So it makes it very difficult to get this legislation passed. And this is what cities are up against. City after city after city that's trying to place bans or fees on plastic bags will encounter the American Chemistry Council. But we're winning the fight, and we're seeing this legislation pass city by city because you and I know what the right thing is. Next slide. Some other things you can do to rise above plastics. This is a campaign started by Surfrider Foundation. Next slide. These are just a few of many things that you and I can do in our everyday lives to rid ourselves of this disposable plague. One is reducing your fork print, avoiding the single-use disposables, the forks, the cups, the bags, the bottles. We have a couple on display right here. In the back of the room, you'll see these stainless steel water bottles. This is eco-usable, and they're a company that we're big fans of. They make these bottles affordable for schools, which is something that we really appreciate. We talk to hundreds and hundreds of students as we do our outreach, and we often propose these kinds of solutions. So this makes it affordable for schools. We encourage you to take one in the back in exchange for a small donation, suggested $10, but whatever you would like to donate. Of course, the reusable bags, you'll see Chico bags here, your own utensil kits. So once you start looking for ways to eliminate disposables, you'll come up with more and more solutions. Straws, eliminating straws, or napkins. So the bags and the bottles have been the really high-profile ones, but we can find many ways to eliminate these single-use disposables. Next. Buying local is a great way to address the whole plastics issue. You may have heard that the average meal travels 1,500 miles before it reaches our plate. And this is largely due to packaging. So one way to just eliminate this issue altogether, eliminate the food miles, the petroleum, the fossil fuels that go into transporting these foods to us, is to buy local and to buy real food. If you've ever come across Michael Pollan, his nutritional approach and advice is to eat food, real food, mostly plants, and not too much. 3 short sentences that kind of encompass the whole nutritional crisis that we're facing as a country. Another issue with processed food, most of that canned food is lined with bisphenol A, so that's not one that we would normally think of. Your safest bet is to eat non-processed whole foods and avoid the health and the plastics issue here. Next slide. We see this in a lot of schools that we go to. We go give talks at schools, and then afterwards we'll join the kids for lunch and just see an atrocious amount of disposables. So this was a school that we went to that we thought was a pretty good model. The milk cartons may be the only piece of waste generated, where the kids were using real utensils, eating real food, and it was on reusables. So this is something we can aspire to for our school children. Next slide. And, of course, we can buy used, buy recycled, and simply buy less stuff. So some examples of this. Our bikes here, we've talked a lot about all these expeditions where people need the fanciest gear and the fanciest new stuff. I got my bike 5 years ago at a recycled shop in Santa Cruz, and Marcus got his for $10 at a garage sale. So you don't need fancy gear. You don't need to buy new stuff. The world is so inundated with stuff that we can usually find good materials without buying new. Of course, buying used and buying recycled. So Chico Bag has just come out with a new bag that's 70%, I think, recycled content. Preserve is another example of a toothbrush made out of recycled content plastics. So supporting the industry of recycled, because this is another reason why we're having this recycled crisis, is there's not a huge market for recycled products. So this is another thing we can do. Next slide. And here's a quick one you can do in your household to eliminate plastic packaging in your cleaning solutions, is simply make your own out of available materials. Lemon juice, baking soda, and vinegar can clean just about anything without needing a plastic spray bottle. And people often ask, well, what about shampoo? What do you guys do about shampoo or soap? On the road, whatever we can find. But you can find actually shampoo bars, and that eliminates the plastic bottle. I've seen the same for conditioner. So just starting to look for dry as opposed to liquid solutions, because the liquid will, by buying dry, you eliminate the need for plastic. Next slide. You can support local organizations. Surfrider is a great example right here. And of course, our foundation, we're a small local nonprofit. One of the ways you can support us is by becoming members of the Algalita Marine Research Foundation. We're also selling, as a fundraiser, education kits. So if there are any teachers, educators in the audience, we have a small kit that we put together with a DVD, a gyre sample, and some curriculum resources that you can use to teach this education in your community. Next slide. And finally, just thinking about the choices that we make every day to leave a lighter footprint, to not be the typical average American consumer, the bag monster here, but leave the world a little better for the next generation.
So with that, thank you very much. We will stick around. Have a great night. Thanks for coming out.